So before we go on to talk about Confucius' confusion, I'd like to commemorate this moment, which will go down in history as the first TED Talk that is held here at KMLA, and the day a kid named Minwoo Chang will deliver an awful speech. So to do that, what's expected of us in this generation is to take selfies. And that's what we're exactly gonna do. So here's my cell phone, and we're gonna take a selfie all together. So I'll somehow try to fit all of you within the frame. Okay. Wait a minute. Okay, here goes nothing. Okay. 3, 2, 1. There we go. Thanks. Good job, everybody. Nice teamwork. So, the reason why I did that is, frankly, I'm not a huge supporter of selfies, but what I am is I am a member of this generation, a generation that Time likes to call the me generation. We are a generation that is known to be the biggest narcissists that the history of human evolution has ever seen. Now, it's true. See, for example, the world in itself, when they see us, they see a group of people who love to post, who love to blast our Facebook walls with pictures of our ugly faces, thinking that a duck face would somehow make it any better. Now, we're seen as other generations, as a group of people who love to make use of our Facebook friends, our Twitter followers, and use them as sales figures, to meet together, not just talk to each other, but to look into our phones. Now, this is the generation that we are thought to be. But then, what's also true is that we are actually the foster children of social media, and it's because of social media that we have this connection that we've never seen before to the rest of the world. For example, back in China, we'd have students who are supposedly off limits from Google or YouTube joking around about how there's this independent candidate that goes by the initials of DN, who has won over 9% of the presidential race polls in North Carolina. Now, we have students here at KMLA who debate on the issues of, for example, issues of Putin's policies. We talk about the violence that happens in the Middle East, and we watch, for example, Jon Stewart or John Oliver on their shows. This is the generation we are, and you can't deny that this kind of social awareness has never been seen before. Now, okay, so we as a generation may be seen as lazy, as very incompetent, narcissistic, but what we actually are, we are rather just an adaptation to the world that's changing, adaptation to a world that has become so full of abundance that instead of just doing as we're told, just do, we think before we do. We think about our experiences abroad. We think about the different social awareness of what happens around us before we make choices and define what is happening around us. And then there's Korea. Okay, that's not it. And then there's Korea. See, in Korea, what happens is that for the last 50 years, we've been so fixated upon economic development that we've never been able to define how we accept Western influences. See, we've been under the influence of the Western Hemisphere for the last 50 years, and yet we haven't exactly defined how we're going to accept this. And so it's created a discrepancy between what we want to hold on to, our old Confucius ways of thinking and our old Confucius ways of behaving, and what we want to accept, bring into the society, Western values. And as a Korean student of the me generation, who's lived abroad in Seattle during the most formative years of my life, I've come to the understanding that this is very troubling. This discrepancy should not just be ignored. So first of all, it goes in the small things in my life. For example, well, throughout my life, I've always thought that it was honorable to be so respectful of each other, to treat each other with the utmost respect, and do things like bowing to each other all the time. But then there are situations when I really desire to hit somebody in the face. Well, not hit, but then criticize them in front of their faces, because they're so obviously being a obnoxious, obnoxious person who's angering everybody out. But then, just because he's a senior, just because he's 1 year older than me, I'm not allowed to, by the society, to criticize him in any way. And then this discrepancy influences me in the most fundamental levels of my life. For example, my cultural identity. See, here in Korea, in the KMLA society, I'm often called a fake American. And it's mostly because I have a bad Korean pronunciation, because I have a bad Korean pronunciation, and my mannerisms often tend to not cooperate with the original traditional ways of Korean thinking. But truthfully, when I go to America, nobody will see me as an American, and I don't even think of myself as an American, because just simply as what I look like, I'm not American, and I am different. So we have this discrepancy in our life, and it is not a problem that's just unique to myself. By attending at an international middle school and by attending here at KMLA, I've learned that this is an issue that is common throughout our generation, the Korean Minjok generation, and the problem that exacerbates this even more is that the Korean society, having fixated upon economic development for the last 50 years, we haven't really decided upon how we're going to accept this. And because we don't have somewhere to go to when we have this cultural dilemma, somebody to ask for help, we tend to show very extreme responses to this cultural dilemma that rests in the poles of this issue. So what happens is that there are certain members of my generation, that would think that they're Americans. They start to think that they're gonna let go of their Korean roots and they're gonna start acting like Americans. Now the problem with that is that, well, it's an inevitable visual aspect of ourselves that we're inevitably different from what a common American would think of themselves as looking American. And moreover, what the bigger problem with this is that instead of playing along our own rules, we have to prove ourselves to the world that we are something that we look like, that we don't actually look like. And then there's the other pole of that half. There's this group of people who believe that we have to hold on to our traditions, hold on to our Confucius traditions, fixate upon that, and try to enforce that upon many others. Now their problem is that when they're actually given a choice to talk to a foreigner and describe their cultural heritage and how proud they are of their cultural heritage to the foreigner, all they can say is, "Do you know kimchi?" Or, "Thank you, fine, I'm fine, and you." That's all they can say. So when our responses to this cultural dilemma lie in these poles and these extremes, there's clearly a problem. There's a problem that we don't exactly know how to respond. And it's not a matter of us defining ourselves as labeling ourselves as Korean or American, but the fact is, we are a generation of people, a new generation of people who have our roots lying within Korea, but at the same time have been influenced by the Western Hemisphere so far that it also lies within our identity as well. So what's essential in that kind of situation is to look at understanding why there's the parts of our Korean identity that seems to pull us back, but also the parts that we are allowed to be proud of, and then the parts of the Western values that are not recommended to accept, but then at the same time, the other parts that we should accept at the same time. So first, looking into the Korean society. So when we think about Korean values, we first think about filial piety, respect for each other, grade grubbing, Ivy League and Seoul National University maniacs. Also there's modesty and hardworking, and then there's middle class servility. That's what we think of when it comes to Koreans and general Asians. Now the problem with this, well, the good side of this, the good side of this is that we become doctors, we become lawyers, and we become accountants, and somehow we were able to account for a median average income level of our ethnicity in the U.S. or around the world that surpasses any other ethnicity. And we're somehow able to excel superbly in school by being one of the top tiers, along with other Asians, when it comes to school performance. Now the problem is, when we go beyond this, when it comes to the community and the society that we form, we create a system that is rather restrictive and therefore does not directly attack the problems that we face, but then we direct the frustrations that are created by such problems in a different angle. So first, looking into the education system. Now the problem with the Korean education and about Koreans is that we don't think that there's any meaning to intrinsic value, intrinsic experiences, intrinsic learning. What we think about is that because we think we so prioritize hard work and modesty, we think that in a system where we praise constant test taking, we will somehow be rewarded. Those who commit to the system will somehow be rewarded. Now, when in a certain system, we don't have intrinsic value. We aren't recommended to pursue intrinsic values. And what we see is, we see kind of like a similar thing in the Korean household as well. In the Korean household, we're taught of, for example, old Korean proverbs that tell you, don't stand out, don't be the weird one, or else you'll be alienated. Don't be like, let's say, like me. Don't be like me. And then you'll be the weird one and you'll be alienated. And then we have this strict system of respect for others, strict system of filial piety that affects the individual to the point where the individual starts to think that there are these rules that are not really in the rule book, rules that you're supposed to keep just because we're supposed to have this respect for each other, and thus we limit ourselves, limit the potential we might potentially have. So when it comes to education, we create a system that we think that hard work and perseverance will somehow reward us in the end. But what happens actually is we create a system where the people who come out of the system are people who do not have who think that inner values are of any importance. So when we look at this in a bigger scale, in terms of the society we create, in terms of the community we create, first let's look at the stance of Korean Americans in the global community. So many complain, usually Korean Americans, they complain that they're unable to rise up in the social ladder to a certain point because of the what we call the bamboo ceiling. And it's partially true. It's partially true that it has been shown that executives would prefer a person, let's say, with the name of Donald Trump rather than Minwoo Chang, even though their requirements are the same. But beyond that, if we look beyond that at what exactly we are and what kind of people that this education system has created, our traditional educational values create an entity that does not fit into what the world defines as being a pioneer. So to be a pioneer, to be a leader in this world, you need self-intuition, you need knowledge of how to organize a community, you need a system of networking, and a more self-assertion. Such values, which are not recommended in a Korean environment. In a Korean environment, you're supposed to have modesty, hard work, and become a doctor or a lawyer. That's what we're told to do. And thus is the fundamental reason why we are not capable of rising up in the social ladder in a global hemisphere, in a global environment, rather than just being the bamboo ceiling. Moreover, when it comes to specifically in the Korean society, we create individuals who are so obsessed over respect, obsessed over filial piety, that they restrain themselves. They restrain themselves and they are not allowed to talk about their disagreements, their negative feelings for a certain entity who might have a different argument with them, or a certain social issue that is rampant in this society. And instead of directly criticizing at these issues, what they do is they hold on to that frustration and vent it out in a certain other area. For example, flaunting themselves in social media, or criticizing people behind the backs. That's what we normally do. And then when there's an issue, like the Daewon incident, that's worthy of creating a group of people, a mob, let's say, to express, to finally vent out these feelings, frustrated feelings, it rather becomes not an issue of what's right or wrong, rather an issue of emotional fights between a mob of people and another group of people. And thus, as we saw in the Daewon incident, during which the biggest issue was not about how to rescue the survivors or etc., but rather the fight between the civilians and the government. And the government was fixated upon how to shut down the civilians of their harsh criticisms, and the civilians were focused on why the government is like this and how to shut down the government. So in such a system of following just Korean traditions and Korean values, we see a system where just because we want modesty, just because we want respect for each other, we're not able to deal with our problems directly, and we're not able to rise up in the social ladder as we want to be. And then when it comes to American values, the Western values, more specifically American values, the pro side of this is that of these values is that they promote taking risks, unlike Korean values. And that in itself is a stepping stone to creating what one would say a leader and a pioneer when it comes to how we define them in the global society. Moreover, they encourage individuals to have this kind of arrogance on deciding which rules to follow and which rules that are not necessary when it comes to enhancing the environment, enhancing the world we live in. And thus they have this kind of arrogance to go over unneeded rules, and therefore in order to develop the world and take it a step further. And then also there are the negatives. Of course, there's cultural imperialism, materialism, and etc. But then behind all this, the end of all this, what we have to understand is that as the futures of Korea, as the new generation of Koreans, it's not a matter of how we define ourselves, how we label ourselves as Koreans or Americans, but rather the fact is we are Koreans with Korean roots, but with intimate Western values that influence us intimately, and thus is a huge part of our individual identities. Therefore, once again, in order to overcome this stagnant environment we have created in Korea, it's crucial to understand that there are parts of our Korean identity that pull us back. And to overcome that, we have to accept that there are Western values that are useful and are essential when it comes to developing. And lastly, what's the most essential thing to remember is that to be proud as a Korean in an international society, and thus playing along your own rules, and rather than trying to prove yourself as something you're not to the entire world. Thank you.